They fired me 2 days before the IPO. Not during the planning, not during testing. 2 days before the bell rang on Wall Street. My name is Ethan Chu. I'm 36. I was the head of supplier operations at Archer & Rowe, a retail logistics firm that grew from a scrappy Midwestern warehouse to a national supplier for brands like Target, CVS, and eventually, Amazon. You wouldn't find my name on their investor pitch decks. But I'm the one who secured the golden contract with Tavora, our Southeast Asia fulfillment partner, when no one else could. That contract became our pipeline, and for 3 years, I quietly kept it running. I'm not the loudest in the room, but I remember everything, especially who tried to erase me from the story. Let me tell you what really happened, and why firing me wasn't just petty, it was suicidal. When I joined Archer & Rowe, we were still operating out of a leased industrial strip off Route 9. Chris Rowe, the co-founder, was one of those LinkedIn cocky types. MBA from Duke, talked about disruption like it was a product you could ship. And Bryce Archer? He barely showed up. He lived in a high-rise in Chicago and played founder from a distance. But I didn't care. I wasn't there for glory. I came in because I understood supply chains. Not on paper, real ones. Boots on concrete, ports, union tensions, delays, workarounds. They hired me after their 4th failed attempt to land a supplier in Asia that could deliver both fast and compliant. I flew out myself to Bangkok. Spent 3 weeks in Tavora's industrial park. I don't speak Thai. But I learned enough to earn trust. I inked the deal personally. And this time I didn't just send a PO. I structured the contract in my name with licensing rights for the forecast models, territory segmentation clauses, and most importantly, contingency failover triggers. Nobody read those lines back then. Not even Rowe. He just saw the numbers. Margins up 16%. Delay rate down 42%. Within 6 months, our stockpiles looked like Amazon's. That's when they started calling us the quiet unicorn. By year 2, we weren't a startup anymore. Suddenly, we were on Forbes' radar. Rowe cleaned up his pitch. Bryce appeared on stage again, and I became invisible. I wasn't in the meetings with VCs. I wasn't flown out to Palo Alto. Hell, I wasn't even invited to our own Series C closing dinner. But I stayed. Because I thought, maybe they just don't know how to value people like me. People who don't storytell, they just deliver. I started getting used to the silence. Until one day, it got louder. It was a Thursday. April. Rainy. I remember because I was watching a real-time dashboard glitch orders duplicating. Then my Slack lit up. Can you jump into this quick call with HR? I thought it was a visa issue for one of our overseas staff. Instead, it was 2 people I'd never met. Cameras off, voices cold. Hi, Ethan. Effective end of day, your position will be dissolved. I blinked. Sorry. This is part of a company-wide consolidation effort. You'll receive a transition packet via DocuSign shortly. No mention of Tavora, no handover, no plan, just like that cut. The call ended. I just sat there, looking at my own reflection on the dark screen. That night, Rowe posted a selfie with Bryce. Champagne. Captioned, "Stronger, leaner, ready for IPO." But here's the thing they didn't know, or forgot, the supplier agreement. The one that fed 63% of their high-margin inventory wasn't under Archer & Rowe's name. It was under mine. Signed, notarized, renewed every 12 months automatically unless I opted out. They never bothered to read the clause. You see, I didn't build Archer & Rowe's backend like a vendor. I built it like a vault with keys only I knew existed. They replaced me with a logistics AI tool from a consulting firm in Austin, and thought automation would save them. But that AI was trained on supplier behavior that required my manual overrides. Rowe didn't realize. You can't automate trust. So yeah, they fired me 2 days before ringing the bell. But they also fired the only person who knew what to do when the container ships didn't arrive. Stick around. You're going to want to see how I made sure their IPO never shipped. And if stories like this speak to you, subscribe to the channel. Because there's more than one way to return the favor. Looking back, I should have seen it coming. There was this one meeting. I remember it so clearly because nothing about it felt right. It was the kind of moment you try to forget until later, when it becomes the piece that makes the whole puzzle make sense. They had just landed the Amazon deal. It was big. Maybe too big. And everything changed after that. Before we were a small team, scrappy, hungry. Everyone had their hands in everything. I was the one managing supplier relationships, writing logistics APIs, dealing with late containers, even negotiating last-minute rate drops with third-party warehouses. No one questioned why I did so much. They were just relieved someone could handle it. But after Amazon came in, the vibe shifted. Suddenly there were advisors, fancy ones, guys with MBAs, polished LinkedIn profiles, and no clue how fulfillment worked in the real world. And then came the meeting. The founder, Ryan, called it an alignment session. Funny name for a room full of people who barely looked at each other. I walked in with a printout of the Q2 inventory projections ready to talk about restock timing. Instead, I got a whiteboard covered in terms like vertical integration margin compression zones and unit economics by SKU cohort. I sat there, invisible. It was me who'd built the back-end workflows that kept them from going under during the holiday crunch. But now I was just ops guy. Ryan didn't even introduce me. He pointed at the board and said, "Once we lock in the Amazon pipeline, we need to sunset legacy systems." Then glanced at one of the new guys, some consultant from Bain, who nodded like he actually understood what legacy systems meant. He was talking about my code, my vendor routing tables, my shipping algorithms, my whole damn system. No one said it out loud, but the message was clear. They wanted to phase me out. I didn't confront anyone that day. I just nodded through the rest of the meeting, took my printout back, and left. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things they didn't know. Like the fact that the deal with High Tide Logistics, the one that let them offer 2-day delivery in the Southwest, was under my name. My EIN. I'd brokered it personally when we couldn't pass credit checks. Or that the real-time tracking API they bragged about, I wrote the first version at 3 a.m., during a shipping crisis they never even knew happened. They didn't own that infrastructure. They just acted like they did. I started backing things up, quietly, not to sabotage, but to protect what I built. My supplier contacts, routing spreadsheets, contract PDFs, even the fallback protocols I designed when the ERP went down during Chinese New Year. I knew I wasn't just some disposable ops guy. I was the system. Weeks passed. I kept my head down. But I started noticing more signs. Ryan stopped replying to my Slack messages. Then he removed me from the Amazon onboarding channel. And when I brought up warehouse scaling for Q4, he told me to stay in my lane. My lane? I'd been driving this truck since it was just a blueprint. The final straw came in the form of a calendar invite. Ops handoff, internal transition plan. No one told me about it. No context. Just a 30-minute block with Ryan and a new hire named Jared. I didn't know who Jared was. But when I checked his LinkedIn, I felt sick. He was fresh out of college, no logistics experience. But his last name matched one of their board members. Of course. Nepotism wrapped in startup speak. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore. The meeting was short. Ryan didn't even look up when I joined. He said, "We're grateful for everything you've built. We're just entering a new phase, and we need someone with a different, strategic lens." Jared smiled like he knew something I didn't. I asked one question. "Is this a transition or a replacement?" Ryan didn't answer. He just closed his laptop. That was it. I left the office without saying goodbye. Got in my car, drove past the warehouse I used to help unload boxes at, past the tiny office where we whiteboarded our first supply chain flow, and by the time I hit the freeway, something clicked. They thought I was gone, but they didn't understand what I still held. They didn't understand what I had done to keep this company alive. The warehouse routes under my name, the fallback server for international tracking, on my private cloud, and that AI system they were rushing to integrate with Amazon. It was trained on data I had personally sourced, cleaned, and structured, from vendors I signed, on contracts I negotiated, using formats I designed. They had no clue, no idea that the foundation they were scaling on was still mine, and that gave me a choice. Let them take it, or remind them who they underestimated. I didn't go back the next day. Didn't check Slack, didn't answer emails. There was no need. I'd already been erased from the system, just not officially. They probably thought I was sulking, or nursing some bruised ego. But I wasn't. I was watching. That's something people like Ryan never get. They think revenge is emotional, reactive, loud. It's not. It's quiet. It's a spreadsheet with invisible formulas. A supply chain with dependencies buried 3 layers deep. It's knowing which ports will delay in winter and which vendor reps actually take your calls on a Saturday. It's patience, and I had plenty of that. The first thing I did was check the contracts, the real ones, not the ones stored on the company Google Drive. The real agreements, the ones I signed directly when the startup couldn't get terms on their own. Back then, we had no leverage. Our financials were a joke. So I stepped in as a guarantor. High Tide Logistics, 2 regional warehouses in Nevada and Texas, both still in my name. I pulled up the service agreements. Termination clause 30 days with written notice. But here's the thing. There were exclusivity riders tied to inventory segmentation. If they tried to reroute or duplicate SKUs outside my authorized lanes, it would trigger a breach. I'd built that in, quietly, not to trap anyone but to keep chaos in check. Now it was leverage. Second, the vendor data. They had the dashboard, sure, but I had the relationships, contacts saved in my phone, deals inked in back channels. One supplier even ran invoicing through a separate account I owned left over from my solo consulting days. If they tried to swap me out too quickly, things would crack, and that gave me a window, not to destroy them, but to redirect. I spent the next 2 days doing one thing: listening, watching their job postings, reading between the lines in investor updates, checking LinkedIn for new hires, new titles, new stealth mode announcements, and then I saw it. A new ops director, the guy Jared was reporting to. They were scaling. Fast, too fast. And someone, maybe the new guy, was trying to migrate the backend. Poor move. Especially when half the automation scripts were written in Python with custom wrappers that only worked with my routing tables. They'd break things just trying to rename a column. And that's exactly what happened. Monday night, I got a text from one of the old warehouse managers. "Hey man, did you get let go? Stuff's a mess here." I didn't reply. Just asked one thing: is the Nevada truck stuck again? His response: yup, can't generate the bill of lading. System's throwing errors. I smiled, because that function. It relied on a third-party bridge API, hosted on a server they didn't own. Mine. I hadn't turned it off. Not yet, but they were about to feel what dependency meant. I didn't want to destroy the company. Not then. There was still a part of me that cared about the people. The team members who stayed late on Fridays. The ones who built this thing from nothing. But Ryan, he'd made his choice. He'd built a tower on a foundation he didn't own. And he forgot to ask what I was standing on. I scheduled a meeting with High Tide. Not through email. In person. Drove out to the warehouse in Nevada. Sat down with the regional director. I laid it all out. Explained the upcoming breach, the shift in routing protocols, and how their SLA would tank if they kept shipping under the new system. I didn't ask for anything. Just showed them what would happen if they stuck with Ryan's team. And then I made a proposal. A new company. Lean, focused, run under my name. Same freight lanes, same warehouse teams, same reliability, but smarter. No VC nonsense, no inflated promises. They were on board in 15 minutes. Then came the suppliers. I didn't pitch them. Didn't beg. Just sent one message. Hey, if the ops team's asking for format changes, let me know. I built the system they're using. Within hours, I got a dozen responses. They didn't trust the new guys. Too many delays, too much jargon, no real communication. One vendor even wrote, "I'll go where you go, Ethan, just say when." That hit harder than I expected, because for a while I'd thought maybe I was replaceable. Turns out I wasn't. Not really. By Friday, I had everything I needed. Contacts, contracts, confidence. The company I'd helped build was still operating, but it was bleeding. Missed delivery windows, vendor misfires, routing mismatches. And one very confused Amazon rep who couldn't understand why their system kept rejecting integration attempts. I didn't smile. Not yet, but I knew this. They had underestimated the one person who actually knew how it all worked. And I wasn't just going to disappear. I was going to build something better. Right next to them. Let them watch. Let them realize. You don't fire the architect when the building's still under construction. By the end of that week, I had most of the infrastructure back under my control. Not through force, just friction. The kind that makes people hesitate before committing to something they don't fully understand. Most founders think they're visionaries. They focus on the next big thing, the app, redesign, the pitch deck, the acquisition call. But supply chain, operations, that's not something you can bluff your way through. It either works or it doesn't. And right now, Ryan's side wasn't working. I watched from the outside, not because I was hiding, but because silence reveals more than confrontation. I noticed small things first. The way tracking updates went from on time to pending. The sudden flood of "we're experiencing higher than normal volume" emails sent to customers. That wasn't volume. That was failure. Logistics isn't about moving packages. It's about trust. And once trust cracks, it all comes undone, one delayed pallet at a time. That weekend, I got a call from Carla. She used to handle vendor onboarding. Smart, sharp, quiet. The kind of person who solved 10 problems before anyone else realized they existed. She didn't call to catch up. She sounded tired. "Ethan, are you coming back?" I paused. "What?" She let out a long breath. "Because the back end's falling apart. Jared's trying to patch things manually. Orders are duplicating. One client got billed 5 times. They don't know what they're doing." I could hear the strain in her voice. Not fear, just exhaustion. The kind that comes from watching something you helped build get dismantled by people who don't respect it. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just listened. Sometimes that's enough. The truth is, I wasn't interested in coming back. Not to clean up someone else's mess. Not to play second chair to people who saw me as an obstacle. But I wasn't done either. Revenge isn't about destruction. It's about demonstration. And I had a point to make. So I spent Sunday night finalizing the architecture for something new. Not a company, not yet, but a system. Cleaner. Simpler. Designed for scale without the mess of overfunded bloat. I reused the best parts of the old code base. Not the parts they could claim ownership of. Just the logic. The bones. The things I'd carried in my head since we first went live. Then I layered in something they never thought to protect. The human side. Better vendor visibility. Transparent routing logic. Real-time freight pricing with fallback logic when a route failed. I was building something with empathy. They had automation. I had understanding. By Monday morning, I had 3 suppliers asking if I could handle their volume directly. I hadn't even announced anything. Word travels fast when things go wrong. And Ryan's ship was taking on water. They kept trying to hire out the problem. But no one hires loyalty. No one replaces trust with a LinkedIn post. I didn't rush. Instead, I mapped the fracture points, all the things that would collapse under pressure. The biggest one, returns. Returns were always messy, low margin, high risk. Nobody wanted to touch them. Which is why I built a dynamic return logic early on, a soft loop that analyzed product class vendor credit policies and regional freight to choose the most efficient path. They ignored that when I left. They thought returns was just a box on a dashboard. By midweek, the system was rejecting labels. And customers, they were angry. I saw the reviews. Package sat in warehouse for 12 days. No update on refund. Charged for a return I never sent. That kind of feedback spreads, not just to customers, to investors. That's when I made the quietest move of all. I bought a new domain. Nothing flashy. Just clean, simple. One word. Then I sent an email to a handful of people who mattered: former clients, vendors, and 3 ex-employees who still cared. I didn't explain everything. Just said I was starting something leaner. More honest. No press release, no announcement. Just a whisper. And they came. Not all at once. But enough. Enough to prove I hadn't been forgotten. Later that night, I sat alone in my apartment staring at the blank back end of the new dashboard. There was nothing glamorous about it. No investors. No hype. Just code and choices. But it felt clean. Pure. Like getting your hands back on something that actually matters. And as I watched the first vendor login come through, I realized something. They didn't just steal my system. They gave me permission to build it again. Better. And this time on my terms. It was quiet for a few days. Not silent, just quiet. The kind of calm you get before structure gives way. Not because of a single blow, but because the weight has shifted. The tension's in the beams. You just don't see it until you hear the snap. I kept checking the logistics alerts on their public API. They were throttling requests, which meant they were getting hit with too many errors. But instead of fixing the system, they were muting the noise. That's a mistake weak leaders make. They think silence equals stability. I knew better. One of the regional vendors reached out. He ran warehousing in Georgia. We'd worked together for years, never had to write much down. A handshake and a shipping ID were usually enough. He didn't ask for a new contract. He asked if I was back in. I told him I was building something new. His response was short. About time. That stuck with me. About time. Like people had been waiting. Like maybe the system I thought they barely noticed mattered more than I gave it credit for. I wasn't chasing revenge anymore. Not directly. I was building. For real this time. No meetings about positioning. No investor decks. Just core logistics. Smart defaults. Clarity over control. Meanwhile, their platform, Ryan's shiny beast, was breaking down in stages. Not from sabotage. From ignorance. You can copy infrastructure, but not instinct. And the system we built wasn't just software. It was behavior. I started seeing the impact in weird places. Old clients forwarding complaints they'd gotten from end users. A supplier sharing screenshots of 4 different invoices, generated for the same shipment. A mid-sized retailer told me they were rerouting everything manually because no one at Ryan's new ops team knew how the fallback routing tree worked. They had the shell, but not the soul. And it was beginning to show. Then something strange happened. One of the junior engineers, someone I trained, messaged me anonymously. Just a few words. "Are you watching what's happening?" No name, no details. But I could guess. Someone on the inside had started seeing the cracks too. Probably didn't want to say it out loud. Didn't want to be the first to admit the king had no clothes. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. They'd made their choice. So had I. The next week I launched the early access portal for my rebuild. No fanfare. Just functionality. 3 vendors signed up the first night. Then 5. Then 11. And all of them, every single one, had worked with me before. Not because my UI was better. It wasn't. Not because I offered lower fees. I didn't. They came because they remembered. How clean it ran. How the logic held. How we answered at 2 a.m. because someone's freight got stuck in Kentucky. They weren't looking for disruption. They were looking for reliability. By Friday, I heard Ryan had brought in consultants. Big firm, expensive suits, PowerPoints with heat maps. That's what people do when they don't understand their own product. They outsource the diagnosis, and then ignore the prescription. I smiled when I heard, because I already knew what the consultants would say. Your platform has no fallback logic. Your API rate limits are misaligned with order volume. Your support team can't trace transactional IDs across zones. All true. None fixable overnight. Then came the news that sealed it. They lost the Oakbridge contract. That account took 6 months to land. I personally flew out twice, helped audit their warehouse flow, designed a custom rule engine for their high-risk SKUs. Oakbridge was a linchpin, and they pulled it. Silently. No drama. Just gone. Ryan probably found out when the monthly usage report came in, and saw a flat line. I didn't celebrate. There's nothing joyful about watching people drown, even if they pushed you overboard first. But I didn't rescue them either. They had made it clear. I wasn't welcome. Not as a partner. Not as a peer. Not even as an afterthought. And now I wasn't a threat. I was the alternative. It felt quiet again. But this time not heavy. Not the silence of something collapsing. The silence of something beginning. Something precise. Focused. Smaller but stronger. And I wasn't looking back. I didn't need a comeback moment. No big splash. No look at me now. But sometimes the moment comes anyway. And when it does, it's quiet. It looks like a document. Just a PDF in your inbox. 5 pages. Standard legal language. But if you know what you're looking at, you understand immediately. Power. Shifting hands. The email was from a procurement lead at Ridgepath. A national retail chain. Mid-tier but aggressive. We'd spoken once years ago. Back when I was with Ryan's company. I had helped them with a seasonal reroute, nothing big. But I guess it stuck with them. Now they were shopping for a new logistics stack. Their old system had gone through too many hands. Too many patches, too many assumptions. They needed something stable, not flashy, just solid. And they remembered me. The proposal was clean. They wanted exclusive access to my back-end routing engine for high-density metro hubs. Volume guarantee. 2-year minimum. And the part that made me pause. They didn't ask who else was using my system. They didn't care. That's when I realized they didn't just want tech. They wanted someone they could trust when everything else failed. Someone who wouldn't disappear when it got hard. I stared at that contract for a long time. Not because I was unsure, but because I understood what it meant. I would no longer be the quiet option. I would be the infrastructure. And with that came responsibility. I signed, then sat in silence. Let it sink in. The next morning, I woke up to a system alert. My bandwidth threshold had doubled overnight. Orders were flowing in not just Ridgepath, It was like word had gotten out. Like the network I didn't know I had been waiting for a reason to reconnect. Old vendors, new operators, even a few independents I'd never heard of. All coming in through the same door, the one Ryan had locked me out of. That afternoon, I got a call from someone I didn't expect. No greeting. Just, "You built this without funding." I smiled. It was Ava. She used to be VP of product at our old company. She left before things went bad. Burned out, I think. We hadn't spoken since. She didn't ask how I was doing. She already knew. "You always told them the back end was where trust lived," she said. "Looks like you proved it." I told her I wasn't trying to prove anything. She laughed. "That's exactly why it worked." Then silence. Then a question. "You need help." It caught me off guard. I hadn't thought about hiring. Not yet. But I said yes. Not because I needed a product VP, but because I needed someone who remembered what it used to feel like when we were building for something real. Ava came on quietly. No LinkedIn announcement, no press release. She just started fixing things. Things I didn't even know were broken. She reviewed every customer success email, mapped our failure points, built internal dashboards without telling me. It was like working with a mirror. She saw things before they cracked, and she patched them without ceremony. 3 weeks later, Ridgepath sent over their usage report. SLA uptime 98%. They said it was the smoothest Q3 transition they'd ever had. And in the postscript, just one sentence. "Who built this?" I didn't reply. They didn't need a name. Just the system. And it was holding. Some nights I still walked past the old office. The glass building, the tinted doors. From the outside it looked unchanged. But inside, I heard from a contact that their investor pulled the bridge round. Something about under-delivering on the AI rollout. They were trimming headcount, again. And Ryan, still CEO. Still acting like the system was the problem, not the choices he made. I didn't feel triumphant, just resolved. I didn't need him to fail for me to succeed. But it turns out when you build something real, something that works, people notice when it's gone. And they remember who gave it to them. So if you're still here listening, maybe you've been where I was. Maybe you've been pushed out by someone louder, shinier, better connected. But you knew how the system actually ran. And deep down you knew you'd build again. For people who actually cared. If that's you, you're not alone. This is the kind of story we tell here. So hit subscribe and stick around. It started with a DM. Short, unassuming. "Hey, you didn't hear this from me." Attached was a screenshot. A spreadsheet, internal tracking. My name was in it. So was Ridgepath. And something labeled risk, lost to former employee. That was the moment I knew. They noticed. I hadn't thought about Ryan's company in weeks. Not directly. I was too focused on stabilizing load balancers, scaling capacity, building support logic with Ava, but they were still watching, still tracking, still trying to understand how the back end they used to ignore was now their biggest liability. Later that week, the messages came more frequently. A product manager I used to mentor, an account lead who quietly left 6 months ago. Even a junior analyst said he was tired of fake dashboards. They weren't asking for jobs, they just wanted to talk. About what went wrong. About what used to be. One of them sent me a recording. Internal strategy call. Leaked, obviously. I didn't ask for it. Didn't really want to listen. But curiosity got the better of me. It was Ryan's voice. Confident. Slower than I remembered. He was trying to sound in control. We underestimated the dependency, he said. The routing model was more embedded than legal flagged. Someone asked if they could rebuild it. He paused. "No, not from scratch, not at scale." Then silence. Then coldly. "Find a workaround, or find a fall guy." I closed the file. Let the words sit there. Fall guy. It was always someone else's fault with him. I didn't reply to any of the messages. Didn't thank them. Didn't engage. I wasn't interested in gossip, but I kept every message, every file, every forwarded email. Not for revenge, for context. You learn a lot from what people say. When they think you're no longer listening. Ava noticed. She always did. "You're quieter this week," she said over Slack. I told her the truth. That the past was knocking again. That I wasn't sure if I should answer. She called instead of typing back. That was her way. "Look," she said. "You don't owe anyone anything." Pause. "But if they're leaking, it means something's cracking." I stayed silent. She went on. "People don't leak for fun. They leak when they're scared." She wasn't wrong. The next file came anonymously. No message, no sender. Just a shared drive link. Inside, a full financial projection. Q4 revenue shortfall, missed milestones, contract penalties, and the kicker, projected churn if Ridgepath pulled out, nearly 18%. They'd bet their roadmap on keeping my system even after firing me, and now it was slipping away. Because the real value wasn't in the code, it was in the trust. And trust doesn't stay where it's not earned. Still, I didn't say anything publicly. Didn't gloat, didn't leak back. Just kept building. One of the new partners had asked for a regional rollout. We were testing multi-warehouse handoffs. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. No hype, just results. Ava dropped another line in our weekly check-in. They'll offer to buy it soon. I raised an eyebrow. She couldn't see me, but she could hear it in my silence. They always do, she added. When control slips. It felt strange, knowing that what I built in my apartment with no seed round, no pitch deck, no advisory board, was now the thing an entire operation was trying to reverse engineer. They had the money. They had the people. But what they didn't have was the why, the integrity, the design logic, the real pain that shaped every decision. And that's something you can't copy. Not really. Later that night, I logged into one of our admin panels. Nothing urgent. Just routine. But I saw a login attempt. Flagged. Unknown IP. Bot-like behavior. Then another. Then a pattern. It wasn't ransomware. It wasn't amateur. It was targeted. I shut the access port, rotated keys, pulled logs. The attempt stopped. But the message was clear. Someone was trying to get in. Not just competitors. Not just copycats. Someone who knew what they were looking for. I sat there in the dark. Laptop open. The hum of the server rack filling the room, and I realized something I hadn't admitted before. This wasn't about a company anymore. It wasn't even about the system. It was about me, and what I knew, what I carried, what they couldn't replace. That night I started a document, just a note really, titled it Contingency. Nothing paranoid, just smart. Just in case someone forgot who really built the foundation they stood on. It came as an email, plain subject line, catch up. No greeting, no signature, just a message. In town for a few days. Would love to connect. Just coffee. R. I stared at it for a while. Didn't reply. The next day, Ava called. They reached out to me, she said without preamble. I didn't ask who they were. I already knew. Said they just wanted to talk. Offered consulting money. Real money. Her voice was level, but her typing slowed down. That always meant she was thinking. They're worried, I said quietly. She didn't disagree. 2 days later, another email. This one from a partner at a boutique firm. We're acting on behalf of a client interested in your back-end routing framework. Still no names. But the reference was specific. Too specific to be coincidence. Attached was a non-binding letter of intent. $3.5 million. All cash. No equity. Full rights. No negotiation. I sent it to Ava. Her reply was immediate. That number is fake. I smiled. They want it out of your hands, not in their own. She was right. They weren't trying to buy the system because it was scalable. They were trying to erase it, to avoid admitting how much of it still ran on my design logic. The next day, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it ring, but a voicemail came through. It was Ryan. His voice was thinner than I remembered. Ethan. I think we got off track. A lot of emotion in the room back then. I'd really like to meet. Just talk face to face. No apology. Just positioning. He didn't say the words, but I heard them anyway. You won. I didn't respond. I didn't block the number either. Sometimes it's useful to know when a fire starts trying to blow smoke your way. That weekend I went back to my old apartment, just for a few hours. It was empty now, a short-term rental. But the new tenant let me in. I just said I used to live there. He was kind about it. I stood in the same corner where the first system ran, where the heat from the processor used to fog the window, where I stayed up until 4 a.m. debugging root collapse. It was quieter than I remembered. Not because of time, because now I wasn't desperate. Now I had options. I left a small note behind, not for the tenant, just for myself. I folded it and tucked it behind the breaker box. This is where it started. Never forget what they thought was disposable. The following week, the offer doubled. Same firm, different email, $7 million. Still no equity, still no partnership, still just silence. They wanted to disappear the code, buy it and shelve it, erase the proof. And the irony was, they still didn't understand. The code wasn't the product. I was. Ava and I started tightening infrastructure, not because we felt threatened, but because we knew what came next. They wouldn't offer again. They'd try other means. Corporate pressure, legal fishing, whispers to investors, discrediting by proxy. We were ready. I called a friend in compliance. Asked her what companies usually do when they can't buy out a rival quietly. She laughed. 3 things she said. 1, they plant doubt in the market. 2, they start whisper campaigns to partners. 3, they throw a lawsuit at the wall and hope you blink. She paused. But if they're reaching out to you first, it means they already blinked. I didn't smile. Not because I wasn't satisfied, but because I wasn't surprised. That night I got another email. This one, personal, from someone who still worked there. I won't say their name, but they'd always been sharp, quiet, underestimated. They said the internal forecast had been red for 3 quarters, that they'd lost 2 major clients over API errors, that the system was being blamed, even though everyone knew. It had never been rebuilt right. I asked them why they were telling me this. They answered with a single line. Because they blamed you, and I was there. That's when it all clicked. It wasn't just fear. It wasn't just damage control. It was guilt. They were trying to buy silence. To keep the narrative simple, they replaced me with a system I designed, fired the architect, then lost the blueprint. The offer never came again after that. Not formally, not through email, but I did start getting strange calls from reporters. Harmless questions at first, then slanted ones. I didn't answer, but I took note of every byline, because if they were trying to control the story, I'd make sure mine was told exactly how it happened. I waited 3 days before making the call. Not out of hesitation, but timing. They wanted me to respond like I was cornered, like I had something to prove. I didn't, so I called the right person, not a reporter, not a lawyer. I called Lynn. Lynn Patel, independent analyst, well-respected, clean track record, known for one thing, following the data, not the noise. Ethan, she answered on the second ring. Her voice was warm, curious, no surprise. I think I have something you'll want to see, I said. You always do. She didn't ask for details, didn't ask for permission either. Send me the logs, she said. I'll take a look tonight. What I sent her wasn't flashy, no scandal, no secrets, just numbers. 4 quarters worth of back-end routing benchmarks, error rates, latency spikes, cost multipliers from their new system versus mine, all pulled from public vendor logs published through AWS billing APIs. Completely legal, entirely public, just never connected. Until now. Lynn emailed me the next morning. Is this real? I wrote back, verified twice, all public, all replicable. She didn't respond again. She posted instead. The article dropped at 11:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. Title, when cutting costs, everything the back-end breakdown no one's talking about. She didn't mention me by name, but she didn't need to. She laid it out clearly, methodically. Their new system wasn't just less efficient. It was unstable. Every claim was cited, every figure verifiable. By noon, it was trending. By 2 p.m., I got a message from an old client. Was this your framework they replaced? I didn't answer directly, but I did say mine didn't crash during peak processing. That night, Ryan called again. This time, he left a longer voicemail. There was frustration in his voice now, but still no admission. He blamed the dev team, blamed growing pains, blamed scaling challenges. Not once did he take responsibility. That told me everything. Ava and I watched from the sidelines. We didn't gloat, didn't push, just let the facts move. That was the part no one ever understood. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be true. By Friday, investor calls were leaking. Tech blogs picked it up. Reddit threads exploded. One former engineer posted a breakdown of the actual architecture and tagged me. I didn't respond. Still didn't speak. But I started getting DMs, not from fans, from startups, from funds, from people who finally understood the value of quiet builders. A week later, I sat down with Ava and our general counsel. The company had issued a vague statement about restructuring internal systems. No apology, no correction, just deflection. They're hoping it dies quietly, Ava said. I nodded. They forgot the internet doesn't forget. We made a decision that night. Not to sue, not to attack. To publish, we would open source the original routing logic, stripped of proprietary links, documented clean, a proof of concept, not to give it away, but to show what excellence actually looked like. When it went live, traffic broke our landing page. Within 48 hours, devs around the world were cloning the repo, benchmarking it, building on it. We didn't ask for credit. We didn't need to. The code spoke for itself. A week later, a journalist reached out to me directly. He asked for a quote. I sent him one sentence. "Sometimes being erased is the best way to become undeniable." That quote went viral. Not because it was clever, but because it was real. People knew that feeling of being overlooked, replaced, forgotten. And they saw what happened when you stayed quietly excellent. The company never issued a rebuttal. They couldn't, because to fight it would be to acknowledge it. And that would mean saying the part out loud they weren't ready to say, that they had built an empire on someone else's foundation. And when they removed the architect, they lost the map. The month after the article, Ava and I closed our first round of funding. It wasn't massive, but it was clean. No debt, no baggage. Just partners who understood what we were doing, who respected how we got here. That night I walked past our old office building. It looked the same. Lights on, people inside, deadlines buzzing. But something was different. Not in them, in me. I didn't look up with regret anymore. Didn't wonder what could have been. Because now, I knew what came next. And I wasn't building for them. I was building against them. The attention came slowly at first. A handful of developers commented on the repo, then a few more. Then companies started benchmarking it. They weren't subtle about it. Someone even forked the code and called it the real backend. I didn't mind. In fact, I preferred it that way. Quiet recognition, no headlines, just momentum. The kind that doesn't fade overnight. But not everyone stayed quiet. 2 weeks after we published the code, one of the company's board members made a statement on a podcast. He didn't mention me directly, but he called the recent publicity storm a distraction created by disgruntled ex-employees. That stung. Not because I was surprised, but because I knew where it was coming from. Ryan. He wasn't content just letting it pass. He wanted control, even over the narrative. But here's the thing. You can't rewrite a story that already wrote itself, especially when the numbers are still visible, when the code is still being run, when the people talking aren't anonymous. They're builders, users, investors, and they remember what's real. I didn't respond, again, but I made a choice that week. To stop hiding. Ava and I decided to do a quiet interview. Not a press piece, not a takedown, just a long-form conversation on a respected engineering podcast. The kind watched by the people who actually build systems. We didn't rehearse. We didn't even script much. Just told the story from the beginning, the decisions we made, the vision we had, the values we refused to compromise. The episode went live on a Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, it had hit 100,000 views. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't attack. I just explained how it worked. What the code did. What broke when they stripped it out. What it cost them and why. The host called it the most technical and oddly emotional episode they'd ever aired. That made me pause, because I hadn't tried to be emotional. But I guess that's the thing. When you live the work, when your fingerprints are in every line of code, you don't have to dramatize it. You just tell it, and people feel it. The ripple effect surprised me. Our inbox flooded with partnership offers, not just from startups. Banks, logistics firms, a digital identity platform from Switzerland. They didn't ask for a copy of the product. They asked for a meeting, with me. I started doing calls again. 3 a day, sometimes 5. We didn't promise anything, didn't sell, but we listened, and we took notes. And we saw the same pattern over and over again. People were tired of bloated promises, of VC-backed tech that broke under pressure, of beautiful interfaces hiding broken cores. They wanted systems that worked, quietly, reliably, like they used to. That's when Ava said something that stuck. "This isn't just a company anymore," she said. "It's a counter-argument." I asked her what she meant. She shrugged. "They built noise. You built signal. Now everyone hears it." I thought about that for a long time, because she was right. Without meaning to, I had become proof. Proof that being dismissed didn't make your work worthless. That being fired didn't erase your fingerprints. That when they erased your name, the architecture still stood. And if you were patient, they'd trace it back to you eventually. By the end of the month, something shifted. Ryan posted a video on LinkedIn. It was slick, overproduced, background music, sharp edits. He spoke about evolution and company resilience. He thanked his team. He emphasized their cutting-edge back-end infrastructure. It was the first time he ever referenced the rebuild publicly. He never said my name, but he didn't need to. Because by now the comments section did it for him. Dozens of engineers, ex-employees, even users. All called it out. Why didn't you just keep the original system? Didn't Ethan Chu build this first? Feels like the new version doesn't even hold up. I didn't join in. But I watched. And I knew the narrative wasn't his anymore. He could spin it, polish it, dress it up. But the story was already written. In the downtime reports, in the churn rate, in the revenue slope, and in the quiet hum of the open source repo that never went offline. We kept building, quietly, carefully. No big press releases, no funding hype. Just steady iteration, clean deploys, respect earned not bought. One night, I got a message from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. An engineer who'd left just before I was let go. She said, "I use your code every day now. Thank you for not disappearing." I stared at that message for a long time, then closed my laptop, and just sat there, not with pride, but with peace. I hadn't heard from Ryan in over 5 months, not directly anyway. His name still popped up occasionally in press blurbs on investor calls and tech blogs, desperately trying to connect trends. But personally, silence. That changed on a Wednesday morning. The email was short. "Ethan, can we talk? I believe we may have miscalculated some things. Ryan." No subject line, no signature. I stared at it for a full minute. It wasn't the message that surprised me, it was the timing. Because 2 nights earlier, we had quietly signed a partnership with a mid-tier fintech firm. They'd run into scaling problems. We'd offered a solution that didn't promise magic just worked. And apparently someone on their board used to sit on Ryan's board. So the ripples were reaching him now. I didn't reply. Not right away. I wanted to see how it unfolded. By Friday, I got a second message. Longer, wordier, less confident. This one mentioned how some of the original system's design choices had proven more robust than anticipated. I smiled at that, not because it was flattery, but because the subtext was loud. They'd hit a wall. I finally agreed to a call. Not to settle anything, just to listen. He sounded tired. Still polished, still trying to sound like the CEO he wanted to be. But there was an edge in his voice now. The kind that comes when growth slows, and nobody's buying the spin anymore. He didn't apologize, but he did dance around it. Said the rebuild had introduced complexity. Said the investors were curious about alternatives. Said he was open to collaboration. That word collaboration hung in the air for a moment. I let him talk, and when he was done, I just asked, "Are you offering something?" Silence. Then, "We'd like to explore licensing your system. Or even, potentially, reacquiring it." I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't have one, but because it was the first time in a year that he sounded like he was the one trying to prove his value. I ended the call politely, told him I'd think about it. And I did, for exactly 12 hours. The next morning I sent my reply. "Ryan, the system you want to license was never up for sale. It was never a product. It was a reflection of how we think, build, and move. What you're asking for isn't access. You're asking for history to be rewritten. We're not interested. Ethan." I didn't expect him to write back. And he didn't. But a few weeks later, I heard from someone else, a venture partner who'd invested in Ryan's company early on. She reached out discreetly, wanted to understand the new architecture, wanted to connect offline. It was clear the people who once backed Ryan were looking elsewhere now. It felt strange at first, being the one they wanted to hear from, after a year of silence, of dismissal. But it also felt earned. Not because I'd fought harder, but because I'd built longer, quietly, consistently, without flameouts or PR storms, just work that lasted. Around that time, Ava and I began to consider next steps. We weren't chasing revenge. We were building leverage. And now we had it. So the question shifted from what did they take from us, to what do we want next? We didn't want to raise a giant round, didn't want to scale recklessly. We wanted to choose the people who joined, and more importantly, the people who didn't. We made a short list of engineers we respected, people who still believed in software that worked like a backbone, not a facade. Some said no, but most said yes, not because of money, but because of meaning. They were tired, too, of tech that was all pitch, no pulse. By the end of that quarter, we weren't just building a backend anymore. We were building a platform. Not loud, not flashy, but real. The kind that doesn't disappear when trends shift. The kind that gets rebuilt into core infrastructure one decision at a time. One night, I found myself staring at the original server logs from the old system. Just reading. Requests, timestamps, edge cases, errors we caught before they happened. I remembered each one. Not because they were perfect, but because we learned from them. We stayed, even when others bailed, even when the business moved on. That mattered. More than I realized at the time. When I closed the logs, I sat in the dark for a while. No celebration, just clarity. Sometimes the best revenge is outlasting the people who thought they were done with you, and building something so solid they have no choice but to notice. I used to think revenge would feel like fire, loud, raging, cleansing. But now, looking back at everything, it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels quiet, like a door closing with no one watching. Like a truth no longer needing to be said out loud. And maybe that's the most powerful part. 6 months after Ryan tried to reach out, his company was delisted from the investors' high-confidence index. No press release, just a quiet shuffle on a spreadsheet somewhere. They'd pivoted, again, first into AI integrations, then into blockchain compliance tools. Now they were exploring machine identity layers. The language changed, but the truth hadn't. They were chasing noise. We were building signal. Meanwhile, our system kept expanding. Not overnight, not in headlines, but piece by piece, like steel being added to a bridge before anyone walks across. We got a message from a regional bank in Oregon, then a payments company in Atlanta, then a logistics fintech that no one had ever heard of, but whose backend was falling apart. Each one came not because of hype, but because they heard we didn't sell vapor. We sold function, and when they tested it, it held. Ava started giving talks again, but not on panels or VC stages. She spoke to engineers, to builders, to people burned by the idea that success comes from speed alone. People who'd been told good enough was fine until it broke, until trust evaporated. She didn't sell our product, she told our story, and that was enough. I stayed mostly behind the scenes. I wasn't chasing visibility anymore. I was chasing durability. You reach a point where the real goal isn't to be seen, it's to not be easily replaced. And that changes how you write code, how you hire, how you say no. It becomes less about scaling fast and more about scaling right. One night, while archiving some old project notes, I came across the very first diagram I'd sketched for their original backend. It was crude. A few boxes, lines drawn in red pen, annotations about load balancing and trust layers. I hadn't looked at it in years, but seeing it again made something shift, because I remembered what it was like back then, when I believed truly that if I just built something great, they would see me. They'd value it. They'd keep me around. I was wrong. But not about the building. Just about who I was building it for. That shift matters. Not just for the past, but for what comes next. I stopped trying to prove I was irreplaceable. Instead, I built something that was, and now, it speaks for itself. Ava and I still talk about those early days sometimes. Not with bitterness, just clarity. She told me once over coffee, sometimes being underestimated is the best shield. I think about that a lot, because if they had seen us as a threat, they might have fought harder to keep control. But by the time they realized what they'd lost, we'd already built something they couldn't copy. Something that didn't need validation to grow. Just time. And we gave it that. There's a photo I keep on my desk now. It's not of us, not of the team, not of any office. It's just a blank whiteboard, clean untouched. A reminder that every system starts as silence. Every line of code, every architecture choice, every no to something trendy. It all begins there. And what you choose to fill it with, that becomes your story. This story, it didn't end with a lawsuit or a takedown. It ended with a product that worked, a team that stayed, a system that outlived its shadow, and a name mine that no longer needed a title to mean something. So if you've ever been pushed aside, if someone took what you built and thought they could leave you behind, just remember, you were never the product. You were the process. And processes, when they're built right, don't vanish. They evolve. Thanks for listening. If this story spoke to something inside you, stick around. Subscribe for more stories like this. Stories where what's lost isn't the end. It's just the beginning of something smarter. More real. More you.